Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to the big news. The topic for today's discussion, Buddha and his teachings. Before we understand what this topic is all about, a gentle reminder about Target Prelims 2022. As part of this initiative, our tomorrow's session would be with respect to science and technology, which will be the second lecture. So please do tune in from 7:30 to 9:30 p.m. This session will be live on our YouTube channel and will be handled by Rasesha. Let's get started and try and understand what is this topic all about. Why are we discussing about Buddha and his teachings? That is because we are celebrating the Buddha Purnima. Buddha Purnima is also known as Buddha Jayanti. It is also called as Vesak, and this happens to be a Buddhist festival. Buddha Purnima is celebrated to commemorate the birth of Gautama Buddha, who founded the religion of Buddhism. So do note, when it comes to the month of May, especially the full moon day, it happens to be the auspicious month for all the Buddhists in the world. Why? That is because three significant events took place in Buddhism. One, Gautama Buddha was born, and in the month of May, in the full moon day, this also led to the enlightenment of Gautama Buddha. And during this period as well, eventually down the lane, his physical appearance left his body and he remains eternally and reached the nirvana. So basically, when we speak about Buddha Purnima celebrates Buddhism. It stands for peace, non-violence and harmony. It marks the birth anniversary of Gautama Buddha, who was the founder of Buddhism, and this particular day honors the philosopher, the spiritual guide, religious leader, the meditator who gave the world the peaceful ideas, the principles, the ethos and values so that people can adapt in their personal life. So on this particular day of Gautama Buddha, devotees make a visit to the temple. They also pray Gautama Buddha and they do puja and meditate as well. In this particular backdrop, let us try and understand some of the teachings of Buddha. Before we understand the teachings of Buddha, we have to know how Buddha entered this particular phase. When we speak about Buddha, there are important days that we have to capture. What is that important day? When Lord Gautama Buddha was born, he was born as Siddhartha Gautama. He was born to Suddhodana and Maya, the king and queen of Shakya clan. Predictions were made, horoscope was read, astrology was read, and it was predicted that this person, Siddhartha Gautama, could either become the greatest of the rulers or he can also become a great monk as well. So his parents were apprehensive. What if he becomes a monk? So they did not even let him outside. His entire life was in a palace. So he lived all his life up until 29 years in a particular palace and he did not know the outside world. And once he attained the age of 29, he happens to leave the palace and he wanted to know what exactly was happening in the worldly affairs. That is when he took his charioteer, he enters the worldly affairs. He wanted to know how the world is being run, and as he enters and as he leaves his palace, enters the worldly affairs, he sees four important pictures of the life. First, he happens to see an old man as shown in the picture. So he comes to a conclusion that this whole idea of young, that a person will be young forever, is ultimately ruled out. So he comes to a conclusion that no person will be young, no person will be fit and healthy forever, and there is no escape from it. This happens to be the first image that Gautama Buddha sees. Followed by this, he also sees an other man who is also suffering as well, and this particular suffering can be caused to him, it can be caused to his family members. So he realizes, irrespective of who it is, every single person may have to go through some suffering. So it can be a physical ailment, it can be an emotional ailment, it can also be a psychological ailment as well. So suffering is a must, is what he realizes as shown in the second image. The third image that Siddhartha happens to see was that of a dead man, and he realizes that none of us are going to live in this physical world for eternity, and all of us will have to leave this world one final day. While he looks at all these three scenarios, he sees that everywhere there is some pain, there is some grief, and there is some apprehension, phobia about the life. And the fourth image Gautama Buddha sees is that of a monk. This monk, in spite of all the fears, griefs, pains, what he had is an enigmatic smile, and this meant that the wise man was in peace with the world, and even though he has no possessions. And this goes on to show that material needs is not necessary for the happiness. Because Gautama Buddha happens to see all these scenarios in his life, life, he realizes that it was the monk who was able to have a satisfied life with even no possessions, and ultimately he goes on to take the path of the monk, and the astrology in terms of Buddha's life may have come true as well. So he finally becomes one of the greatest saints, one of the greatest monks, one of the greatest philosophers that the world has ever seen. In this particular lecture, we will also try and understand some of the beautiful interpretations that he has given his philosophy towards life. One of the important philosophies happens to be the Four Noble Truths. What are these Four Noble Truths? First, life is full of suffering. What do we mean by it? This happens to be called as dukkha. What is dukkha? Dukkha is suffering. Let's say, for example, you want an iPhone, or you're preparing for the UPSC Civil Services Examination. So when does dukkha come? When does suffering come? You're preparing for this examination for about 2 years. You prepare tooth and nail. You put in all your efforts, but in spite of your efforts, you are not able to fulfill your dreams. So ultimately, when you don't clear this particular examination, that is what is called as dukkha, or the suffering. You might have put in all the efforts, but in spite of it, when you don't clear, that is what is called as dukkha in terms of a civil service aspirant's life. So the first one is life is full of suffering. The second noble truth says suffering is caused by ignorance and selfish desire. This is also called as samudaya. First, we spoke about what is called as dukkha. We understood what is dukkha, but what leads to dukkha? That is what is the physical craving. That is what is the material goods, and we all crave for some kind of objective in life. It is this particular objective that we all thrive for, whether it is the pleasure, whether it is the material good, or reaching our goal. In that particular case, if it is not accomplished, this may lead to dukkha, and that is what is the foundation to dukkha, says Gautama Buddha. The third noble truth happens to be when ignorance and craving are reduced, suffering is reduced. So the truth of the end of suffering happens to be nirodha. When we speak about nirodha, there are two aspects to it. What are the two aspects? One, we are living away our physical life. Our life on this particular earth is coming to an end. This also means nirodha. On another side, what we have is the spiritual life. So on one side, we are giving up our physical life. On the other side, we are attaining towards the spiritual life. So when we take the path of spirituality, none of this will bother us, and ultimately what we reach is a path of nirvana. So for us to reach nirvana, for us to give away all our desires, reach that final step of nirvana, what we require is the enlightenment. This enlightenment is what is called as magga, or the noble eightfold path. So the next question is, what is this eightfold path? When we speak about Eightfold Path, he goes on to say what we require is the right view. Right view about what? We need to know what is right, we need to know what is the truth, we need to know what is the virtue, and we have to keep aside the vices, the negative, and all the evil things that are existing in the system. Then we have to ensure that there is right intention, which is to free our mind of all the evil intentions, and in case we have these evil intentions, such would be omitted immediately. Then we have to speak always good, which is nothing but right speech. Say nothing that hurts the others. We have to empathize with the cause of the others. We need to be compassionate as well. We have to also understand if our words can hurt someone else, such words should be avoided. Then he speaks about right action, which is work for the good of others. Let me also give you an example. In ethics, there are three important words which is also part of your syllabus. What are those? One is sympathy, second is empathy, third is the compassion. Let me explain this with the help of an example where all of us would be able to relate. What is sympathy? Let's say there is one of a student who is preparing for the civil services examination. This person has put in a lot of effort, but ultimately he may not be able to clear. For a person who does not know what is civil services, he can sympathize with the cause of that particular person, because he sees that this particular person was studying for 10 hours consistently for about 2 years, but yet he was not able to fulfill his particular dream. So that particular person has not lived this particular person's life. That is what is sympathy. So sympathy, you understand there is a problem, but you haven't lived that particular problem. Then what we have is empathy. What is this empathy? Let's say, for example, you're all preparing for the civil services examination. I'm teaching you all for the civil services examination. Someday, a person who hasn't cleared the civil services examination, he comes up to me and he says, "Sir, I haven't cleared the civil services examination. So I, as a person who's teaching you civil services, I can empathize with you. Why? Because I have lived this particular path. I have gone through this particular path. I have put in my own efforts as well. That is what is called as empathy. So what do? I actually go about empathizing with your cause because I have lived that particular moment. I understand what you are going through. That is what is called as empathy. Finally, what we have is compassion. What is compassion? I empathize with your cause, but I also say, yes, you can go ahead and clear the civil services examination. So apart from you putting in your efforts, I also put in my efforts so that you can ultimately reach the doors of Labasana. That is what is compassion. So Buddha says right action, which is work for the good of others, which we are doing right now for all of you. Then we have right livelihood, which is about respecting the life. Then we have right effort, which is to resist the evil. Then it is about right concentration, where we have to practice meditation every single day. We all hit the gyms, which is about building our muscles. We all run, which is about keeping our muscles in a stronger way. You have to keep your thought also stronger, for which what you require is practice of meditation. And finally, right mindfulness, which is about controlling your thoughts and not getting influenced by the negative vibes that are in and around you. These are the noble eightfold path that Buddha has discussed. Followed by this, he also speaks about three marks of existence. What are these three marks of existence? One happens to be dukkha, which is nothing but the dissatisfaction. Then what we have is anatta, which is no soul. And finally, what we speaks about is anicca, or impermanence. The first is dukkha, which happens to be dissatisfaction. What do we understand by dissatisfaction? It is not about unhappiness or disappointment. What he basically meant was that we spend pleasant time with our friends, or we might buy a new car, or we might go out on a dinner or a date with our friends. In that particular case, the satisfaction is not kept permanently, but it happens to be only for a temporary period of time. So if at the same time we are not able to accomplish something, this also leads to grief and pain, that he calls is called as dissatisfaction. The second is called as anatta, or no soul. What do we mean by it? A person's character and perspective about that particular person goes on to change every now and then. You ask a person what he seeks to accomplish, what he is all about, what he thinks about himself, he might give you an answer. Ask that particular person the same question after 5 years or 10 years, his perspective about life would have changed. This basically means that there is not self, non-essentiality, which is nothing but no soul, is the second concept of anatta. The third is called as anicca, or impermanence, which basically stands for that all of us would die one day, our physical attributes would ultimately end, and this is the reality, that our physical reality will always come to an end. So there is impermanence, is what is called as the three marks of existence. And finally, we have Gautama Buddha, who also speaks about nirvana. So what is nirvana? This is particularly significant in all the Indic traditions like Hinduism, Jainism, Sikhism and Buddhism. And when it comes to Hinduism, Jainism and Sikhism, it means liberation from the worldly existence. But when it comes to Buddhism, it is about capturing all the emotions together. It is about liberating oneself from all the sufferings. It is about moving away from the desires and keeping a control and check on your emotions, is what is called as nirvana. So basically, nirvana means extinguishing the self and completely halting the illusion of reality, and this reality will no more be impacting this particular person, which is called as nirvana. If we have to take in all these teachings, implement it in our normal life, one of the important lessons that we can learn is with respect to emotional intelligence. When we speak about human development, there is physical intelligence, there is mental intelligence, there is emotional intelligence, and there is spiritual intelligence. What Buddha speaks about is in reference to spiritual intelligence and emotional intelligence. Buddha once said, you will not be punished for your anger, you will be punished by your anger, which means he is asking you to control your emotional intelligence. Buddhist concept of emotional intelligence is much more. It is about controlling your emotions, and this is where he brings into practice the principle on non-violence and peace. He goes on to say that everyone should cultivate happiness and serenity. No one should despise or injure another person. There should be no hatred, only love. Evil should be replaced with good. All the hatred and evil should be removed, and ultimately What we require is non-violence and peace, says Buddha. Added to it, he also speaks about compassion, benevolence, kindness to all significant life forms on earth. It is this that we have to understand with respect to the teachings of Buddha. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.